I'm Ryan from Fireside Knicks, and while the Knicks are coming off of back-to-back losses, wasn't really their best showing over the last 2 days. It looked like they had some life in that Kings game, but ultimately they fell short. It's easy to overreact to losses after you've gone on a nine-game winning streak. We have been unfamiliar with losing as of late, so we're kind of back to having to deal with losses. But overall, not having Jalen Brunson is definitely affecting this team, right? And it's hard to imagine that this team was going to perform well without Brunson. He's arguably their best player. It's him or Randall, and the team is just different without Brunson on the court. They just don't. The spacing is different. The offensive scheme is different. Things just don't run as fluidly. But with that being said, we have a lot to talk about those last two games. A lot to talk about with the upcoming schedule. But with that being said, first off, Dylan, how are you doing? And then number two, what did you see in those last two games that you think are positives, negatives, just anything you in particular think is important to talk about?
Right, so I'm doing good, first off, and, the two losses kind of stink. It sucks to see the winning streak end against Charlotte out of all teams, but at some point the winning streak was going to end. That's just how sports are. Not all good things last forever, but, obviously they've looked a little lackadaisical the last two games. I don't know if it's fatigue or, like you said, it might be because Brunson's out, so the team just looks different. But, clearly there is something different about this Knicks team right now. They just don't look the same as they did during that winning streak. And, I'm hoping that they can just turn it around fast. I don't want to, think too deeply into it because it is just two games. It's two losses. Eventually I think we all knew they were going to get cold. That's just how teams are. They get cold at some point. So, I know Brunson played a little bit last night against Sacramento. He was doing great in the first half and then had to get taken out for that foot again. I don't know what's up with that. Hopefully it's nothing too serious. Hopefully Brunson's okay to play tomorrow against the Clippers. We can hope for that. But for right now, we have to just look at what could happen if he doesn't play again. And, like you mentioned, they don't look the same. I know, Randall's probably exhausted. He's played every single game this year, and he's played a lot of minutes in all those games. I'm not trying to be the one using the fatigue factor because I know at the end of the day they still have to win these games, but it's clear that the energy is a little bit down. I think that's clear. I think, the two dogfight wins against Miami and Boston definitely put a little bit of, exhaustion on them because, one of them was a double overtime game. They played a lot of minutes, and they were both – and in the Boston game, they were shorthanded, so a lot of guys had to play a lot more minutes than they typically do. So, looking at things like that, I'm just hoping that they can bounce back against the Clippers tomorrow. They got a big game right there again, before they play, I think, the Lakers after that. So, looking ahead, let's just hope Brunson's okay enough to play because clearly they need him. They clearly need him. I know Quickly's been fine as a starter, but he wasn't good last night. I know he came off the bench. He kind of had to suddenly play more minutes in the second half, but he had a bad night last night. I think pretty much almost everyone had a bad night last night except for Josh Hart and Quentin Grimes had a good night too. Barrett had 25 points, but on bad efficiency. So, we just hope that Brunson's okay because he's clearly the difference maker. Like you mentioned, the spacing. He clearly, when he's on the floor, the spacing is much better. He facilitates the offense better. When he's not on the floor, it's kind of a bit of a struggle, because they try to run the offense through Randall, and I think we all know Randall is not the tightest ball handler in the planet. So, doing that has clearly, hurt us a little bit. But I will say this though, on the positive side, I'll give credit to the Knicks where it's due last night because they were faced with quite a bit last night. Down 21 at one point in the game against Sacramento. They didn't have Jalen Brunson in the second half. It looked like they were going to be dead in the water for the rest of the game. They came back. They tied the game in the fourth quarter. Looked like they had a good chance to win because they actually outscored Sacramento both in the third and fourth quarter. So they played a lot better in the second half. But that first half was just so rough that it's tough to come back from. And, making a big comeback like that is also exhausting. So that probably also played a factor into it as well. I'll give credit, they did fight, and, they clearly are still never out of games. So I'll also give them that. That leaves me a little hopeful that they can bounce back against the Clippers. But, we shall see. I think it really all depends on the health of Brunson and, how guys like R.J. Barrett will step up, how they'll respond, how Julius Randle will respond, and Josh Hart as well. He had 15 rebounds last night, which was a really good performance. Almost had a triple double. He had 9 points, 7 assists as well. He was basically doing it all last night. But yeah, just looking forward. Hopefully, we get the pieces we need, because we have a big stretch coming up, and this is the big stretch right here. This is kind of the stretch right here to see where we're going to finish in the standings. So we need our guys healthy. We need our guys to perform when we're not healthy. We need everybody to perform, really just what we were doing during the win streak, really. Need to keep them playing like that. We knew the team was going to get cold. I don't think anyone's shocked about that. But, we want this cold streak to end like now. We need it to end quickly, because we need to get back on track and get back to winning so that we can enter the playoffs on a hot streak and not in a cold streak.
Yeah, and you mentioned just how the offense runs when it's running through Brunson versus running through Randall. I know that people are going to look at it and say, Randall is only good because of Brunson, but I think that's the wrong conclusion to draw. Being capable of running it, having an offense run through you is it's so much different than just how good you are at basketball, right? Like, look, there are plenty of like power forwards or big men or larger players who you can't run the offense with them, because they're as you mentioned, they're not primary ball handlers. You can't rely on them to be primary ball handlers. That's not part of their skill set, and that doesn't make them not good. That doesn't make them frauds. That just means that that's not their skill set, right? And that's what it comes down to, right? The Knicks need to make sure that their guys are handling things the right way and making sure that their guys are put in the best position to succeed, and Brunson is a huge part of that. Another thing I saw in that Kings game is just that you kind of have to ask everyone to do a lot more. And as you mentioned, that they came off of a dogfight against the Celtics. I mean, that game was an exhausting matchup. That was an exhausting game, right? And then you come out and you have to play the Hornets. That team fell apart in the second half, or in the third quarter, excuse me. Well, I guess the second half. And it wasn't. It looked like they were gassed. It looked like against the Kings, the Kings were just the better team right now. Like the Kings facing a Jalen Brunson-less Knicks team, they were just the better team at that point, and that's what it looked like. They were just the better team. There's not really much you can do about that, right? You just got to pray that they're not on their game, and that's not what happened. De'Aaron Fox was on his game to close it out, and Sabonis was able to give them an efficient 24 point triple double. So there was just a lot. There are just things you can't control, and that's one of those things you can't control. But looking kind of a little bit more ahead here, the Knicks are number one going to need good news on Jalen Brunson, and then number two, they're going to need to figure out how to kind of recuperate and kind of recollect themselves, because this isn't the end of the world, right? Losing 2 games, it is not the end of the world. That the Knicks, going they're 9-2 over the last 11 games, right? Regardless of the timing of those losses or the timing of those wins, they are still 9-2 in their last 11 games. They're still red hot in terms of just on the field, on the court performance. So kind of looking a little bit more ahead here, I think the offense is still capable of scoring a lot of points. I think the offense is still capable of doing the job. They just need to, and they're matching up against teams that I view they're better than even without Brunson. Like, this team isn't just the 2021 Knicks without Brunson. They're a better version of the 2021 Knicks. They have a matchup against the Clippers. That'll be a tough game. But then, you're facing the Lakers. You're facing Portland. The Lakers, they don't have LeBron there right now. Portland has Damian Lillard, who is probably going to drop an obscene amount of points in that game, because that's just what Damian Lillard has done this year. But you feel like you should win those games. So for the Knicks, at least for now, it's about just controlling what you can control, which is beating teams you're better than, right? If you get good news on Brunson, you feel a lot better about that Clippers game. But looking ahead here, if the Knicks go 2-1 in these next 3 games, you feel pretty good about things. I don't know if you disagree here.
No, I agree. If you go 2-1 over this next stretch, that's good. I take that, because like I said, I mentioned this before. You said they're still red hot, but obviously they're still red hot in the grand scheme of things. But of course, 2 straight losses, and the 2 ugly losses really at that, because they were both bad. Pure meltdowns at some point in the game. The second half against Charlotte and the first half against Sacramento was not good. So looking at that, obviously it's not the smoothest brand of basketball. So of course they're a little bit colder now, but like you said, a 2-1 stretch of the next 3, you definitely take. And like you said, also, you feel like you gotta win some of these games, because Clippers is a tough game. I admit that could really go either way. It depends really on the health of Brunson, of course, again, but that could go either way. Kawhi and Paul George are still there, and now they have Russell Westbrook. Who knows what he'll do to us? But looking at that, and then you also said, the Lakers, they don't have LeBron. They still have AD. He's a tough guy, but they don't have LeBron. The Lakers are, a not great team this year, so you feel like you got to win that one. Portland, same thing. They have Damian Lillard, and they'll also be facing an old friend in Cam Reddish, but you feel like you got to win that, because when you look at the teams overall, we're better than them. I think we are at least. So looking at that, yeah, of course they got to win those games. And a good 2-1 stretch will be good, yes, because then after that they had. I saw a thing like after the Boston game, they had like the 23rd hardest schedule left for the rest of the season, which is it was a great sign because then that means we have a good opportunity to close out the season strong. And I know at the end of the season they have games against like Indiana, they have a game against Washington, they have a game against like New Orleans, teams that they're not like bad teams, but teams that we're better than. So like teams that you gotta take advantage of when you have them on the schedule and beat them. But just looking ahead, I'm looking forward to a good stretch. I'm gonna remain optimistic because I know they haven't had Brunson these past few games. They only had Brunson for a half last night, so I don't want to be like, oh, they had Brunson that game. They only had him for a half. And quite frankly, if we had Brunson in the second half, we probably could win that game because we would have our clutch guy down the stretch. We didn't have that yesterday, and that's kind of what hurt us because Sacramento kind of gave us the chances down the stretch. They weren't hitting their shots as much. We started to hit shots. We were getting lots of rebounds. The rebounding battle wasn't even a close one at all. We out rebounded them, I think, like 58-42 overall and like 23-6 on the offensive boards. We took over in that regard. So we were given the opportunities. We just didn't capitalize on them. So looking ahead to the next games, they need to capitalize on the opportunities if they're given them. If they're given the opportunities like they were against Sacramento, they need to do the same thing and actually capitalize this time against like LA and Portland and all the other teams ahead. That's a big thing right there. They weren't hitting the shots down the stretch. So if they can just be better down the stretch of games, then that's a big thing going forward. And I'm hoping that they can clean that up as we move into LA teams in Portland and head back home and stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And end of the day, for me at least, I view the New York Knicks as a team that has been resilient all year. This team has risen to the occasion when they've been asked to rise to the occasion. This team has played excellent basketball for the majority of the season, right? It feels like these last two losses have a lot to do with just not having Jalen Brunson there, and I'm not making excuses, right? End of the day, even without Jalen Brunson, you should beat the Hornets. I kind of am making an excuse for that Kings game, not to like downplay the Kings win. Of course, they are an excellent basketball team, and I don't want to take away from that, but I do think Jalen Brunson plays a factor. I think it does change the outlook of that game a little bit. Maybe they don't win it, but it definitely, you can't guarantee that the same outcome would happen of the Kings winning. But as you mentioned, this team has to kind of just put it back together. You know what I mean? This team just has to do what it's done all year, which is take a punch to the face and get right back up and keep swinging, right? Because that's what they've done all year. That's why they're in the position they're in right now. That hot streak is why they're the 5th seed right now. And looking at it, does this hurt their 4th seed chances? Absolutely. I feel like at this point, you look at the 4th seed and it's a pipe dream, right? Which sucks. It does, right? It would have been great to have an opportunity to play for the 4th seed, but it just feels like that's kind of drifting away from the New York Knicks at this point. They also have to hope that they can keep Brooklyn off their tails. Brooklyn's playing Minnesota tonight. They're now tied in the loss column, so you have to hope that the Knicks can kind of turn things around, and as the Nets have kind of turned things around lately, and stave off of being the 6th seed, because then you have a tough matchup against the 76ers squad that's looked really good lately. And quite frankly, it could end up being the Celtics as well. And while, yes, we beat the Celtics without Brunson, we've taken 3 out of 4. Regular season basketball and postseason basketball, it's not the same thing, right? Like if Grant Williams is still struggling, he's not playing in the postseason. He's not going to get rotational minutes. Teams they shrink the rotations. So they're an incredibly tough matchup in the postseason. Looking ahead, kind of looking into certain guys I think have to kind of figure things out. Like RJ Barrett, I think had something going for him post All-Star break. I think it was kind of finding that new role where it's like, okay, I'm not the number 1 option on this team. I'm not the number 2 option on this team. I'm going to play good defense, and I'm going to, I'm going to get shots when I could get them, and it's reduced volume, increased efficiency, better defense. You feel like it's a better version of RJ Barrett. But the last 2 games it hasn't been as good for him. And it's been a lot of inefficient, high points, low efficiency, right? Kind of what you saw from RJ Barrett towards the end of last season. And that's kind of what RJ Barrett's played like without Jalen Brunson, right? And I'm not saying that to say that RJ Barrett can only play well with Jalen Brunson, but it is notable that RJ Barrett and Jalen Brunson have pretty good chemistry with each other. And I do view RJ Barrett as someone who needs to be in an offensive system where he isn't asked to carry the offense. I know that he struggled all year, and I know that, we talk about him a lot, but that's just because he's that important to this team. Do you think that it's Jalen Brunson not being there that's causing his struggles? Do you think it's a matter of just, it's just continuing inconsistencies? Or do you think there's another factor in here that I haven't mentioned with RJ Barrett yet?
Right. So, I think Jalen Brunson plays a huge role, to be honest, because like I mentioned, he's our closer. Last night we came back and it was a tie game, I think, with 5 minutes left in the fourth. But, without Brunson on the floor, you kind of just had a feeling like, that this is going to be a tough one, and that, you don't feel as confident that you're going to win that game because your closer's not on the floor. And I mean, Sacramento has De'Aaron Fox, who's the only other player in the NBA who's more clutch than Brunson. So you kind of had a feeling like, this is going to be tough. We don't have our closer right now, so this might not be an easy one to win at all. And sure enough, they didn't win it. And I think having Brunson not out there was a huge reason why we didn't win it. And, speaking of Barrett, like you said, we do talk about him a lot, but he is important to the team. He's supposed to be the guy that's supposed to make our big trio. He's supposed to make the big three. He's supposed to be that formidable piece, and he's had his ups and downs this year. He's had good games, but, like you said, lately it's just been a lot of bad efficiency. High number scoring, yes, of course, but bad efficiency. He's not shooting the three well at all whatsoever. He's taking a lot of threes and he's not hitting them. So that's hurting us right there in that regard. We're already not a great 3-point shooting team, and I think with that, that's, not a good sign to see at all. I'm hoping, he can turn it around. I'm still holding out that faith that he can do that. But, I think RJ does play an important role too, because we kind of need him to get going, because we've mentioned before, if he gets going, that makes the difference from a good team to a great team for us. That's the big difference there. He's the X factor. If he can kick it up a notch, then we have a legitimate big three when we're healthy, of course. And when Brunson's out, we have a guy we can rely on to fill up that void and make up those missed buckets that we're not going to get from Brunson because he's not on the floor. So, having Barrett at his best is a big thing. And, I'm hoping he can turn it around. I'm holding out that faith again, like I said. But, I think at this point in the season, we kind of know what version of RJ we got this year. We didn't get the version we got of him last year where he was taking over games, scoring 30, 40 points consistently. We don't have that version of him this year, which, is unfortunate. But you have to kind of adjust with it and see what you can get out of him right now down this final stretch. If you can get that 30, 40 type guy again, then that's great. But do I think that's likely? No, I don't think that's likely. I think what we're going to see at best is, 18, 20 points a game, hopefully on better efficiency, and less shots being taken. I know right now he's taking a lot of shots, but that's probably because Brunson's not on the floor. But I think we saw, when Brunson was available and he was playing, Barrett started taking less shots, and it was helping us, in fact, because we were winning games. His shot diet got better. And I'm not saying, if Barrett's not taking shots, then that's great, because, we need Barrett to score. We do need him. That's not saying, he needs to take no shots. No, he needs to shoot the ball. He does need to score. But we also don't need him to take too many shots and not force shots, because sometimes he has a tendency to do that, force layups or force three-pointers. He doesn't have the smoothest three-point shot. He kind of has a flat arc on it, so we can't really rely on him for perimeter scoring, if that makes sense. So when he's not doing great in his strength inside, when he's forcing layups, you don't really have a good product out there on the floor, and it's kind of tough to play him. His defense has been improved over the break, so that's a good thing right there, and it helps us be able to actually play him and keep him on the floor. But I think you saw before the All-Star break, he wasn't scoring good, and he wasn't playing defense, and that's why he wasn't getting late minutes. That's why Josh Hart was playing those closing minutes. That's why Josh Hart was getting more minutes than RJ Barrett in general. That there's a reason for that, and I think it's a justified reason. So looking at that, I think he's an integral piece. He's a very central piece, very key piece going forward. I'm hoping that he can turn it around and be, the player that we had last year with him. I don't think he'll end up being that same way. I feel like we're just gonna have a slightly diminished product of that. I'm hoping we can get a good version of him, because we need him in the playoffs because, like, I think I've mentioned this before, but, in the playoffs, teams are going to scheme around Brunson and Randall. Teams are going to do that. So we need Barrett to step up and be the guy to force teams to actually focus on him as well and make it even more tougher to stop them, the three of them as a trio, Brunson, Randall, and Barrett. Need make teams tougher for that because if Barrett's still struggling and Brunson and Randall are boxed up in playoff matches, that's a recipe for disaster because then we don't have many options to fall back on offensively. And then, you can't win games if you can't score. They always say defense wins championships, and I agree with that, but you also have to be able to score. So looking at that, we need RJ to step up big time, and I think you can agree with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, when you look at basketball, out of all the major sports, it feels like, or at least the ones that I know the most about, it feels like in basketball, it is integral to have both a good offense and a good defense. You cannot just have one or the other. It has to be both, or else the postseason, you will fall apart. And as you mentioned with RJ Barrett, it's like he has to figure out the scoring. The 3-point shot has to fall. These things can't continue because in the postseason, as you mentioned, the Knicks are going to have to make some really tough playing time decisions, if it comes down to it. If the Knicks are in the fourth quarter of a tight playoff game, season's on the line, right? Let's say they're playing the Cavs in round one. It's a crucial game 6 or game 7. Josh Hart is going to get the floor right now over RJ Barrett. You would want Josh Hart on that floor. You want him on that court because that's the guy you trust to positively impact the game the most. And that's, but at the same time, that takes away a scoring option. Right now, you only have Brunson and Randall on the court who can create shots for themselves. And while Grimes has shot creating abilities, it hasn't been consistent yet. You feel like it's still developing. He is just the year 2 player. And whether they maybe get quickly on the court, who I know can create some shots for himself or not, they're going to have to make tough decisions. And RJ Barrett potentially, and if RJ Barrett can figure things out, get his 3-point shot to fall a little bit more consistently, then that tough decision won't come down to not playing RJ Barrett. It'll come down to a good tough decision, which is, having so many positive contributors at the wing spot or at the 2 and the 3 that you have to figure out which guys are going to play in the final minutes of the fourth quarter of a playoff game. Kind of looking at other factors that we saw, or other key factors of this team. I feel like we've kind of talked. I know you hinted at this with Josh Hart, just how impactful he's been for the New York Knicks. 15 rebounds, 3 steals. I mean, yes, he only had 9 points, sure, but he only took 4 shots, right? That's just the style of basketball he plays, right? He's not going to be a guy again who lights up the points per game stat category. There, he's not going to go out there and drop 30 a game, right? He's not going to be the guy who leads you in scoring. But he's going to be the guy who he just provides this energy for this team. We've raved about him constantly because, quite frankly, he's a player you can rave about, and there's just new things to talk about with him every time we come on this show. Looking at Josh Hart, how do you think his role is going to? Do you think I imagine he still comes off the bench for the Knicks as the season kind of dwindles and as we enter the postseason. But do you think the Knicks consider starting him? Do you think the Knicks, just use him as someone who comes off the bench and then close in the fourth quarter? How do you view Josh Hart's role in a postseason environment, kind of based on what we know with the roster right now?
Right. So, down the stretch, I imagine he'll continue to come off the bench just because of the way he's thrived in that role, and he's looked really good in that role. So why change it up on him? But come playoff time, I think it'll be a little bit different scenario. I feel like they'll start him out on the bench in the playoffs, which would make sense because it's worked throughout the regular season. But if they notice something, I feel like regardless, Grimes will see less minutes in the playoffs, and I don't think it's because necessarily because of how he plays, but just because he's a year 2 player. There's massive inexperience with that, and he mostly spots up shoots on offense. We need guys that can kind of push the pace on offense, and I'm not saying Grimes can't do that because he has done it before. We saw last night Grimes had a nice stretch where he made some tough layups. He was moving the ball. He made really nice passes. He hit a couple shots. That's great. And it's great that we have a guy like that. But I do think just because, Hart is more of a veteran, he's played longer, the way his impact is really just overall on the offensive, the defensive, the rebounding, all that, I feel like regardless of where Hart is placed in the lineup, he's going to get more minutes than Grimes. I think that's a huge thing. He'll probably play more than Barrett too because, you mentioned he'll get those closing minutes, and I definitely agree. He's going to get those closing minutes. It's going to be some sort of combination of Brunson, Hart, Randall, those guys you kind of know are going to be in the closing lineup. But then Center is kind of a question mark because Mitch is a great shot blocker, but he doesn't have the best feet on defense. He kind of fouls. He kind of struggles against offensive minded centers. So then the Hartenstein might play those minutes and get that kind of player to guard. But you also don't know if you want to play Grimes or Barrett in the other spot. You don't know. There's a like you mentioned, there's a lot of rotational decisions they have to make. And they're key rotational decisions, but they're also tough decisions they got to make because, like I mentioned, Brunson and Randall are going to be a part of closing lamps. They're going to, and Josh Hart probably will be too. It's the other spot. It's like the shooting guard spot, or the small forward spot, and the center spot that are kind of like you're not entirely sure who's going to get the bulk of the closing minutes. And I think it really just depends on what happens on this final stretch. I think like this final stretch right here, you're going to kind of get a sneak peek of what like playoff closing lamps will look like. Obviously, I don't think last night was a good example because we didn't have Brunson, so we kind of had to mix and match our options a little bit. But I think like if we get a big game down the stretch, close game, and like we have our guys healthy, and you see a certain rotation, you see a certain lineup out there to close minutes, and it works. I feel like that could be a sneak peek of what we could see in the playoffs. So just to wrap up the point. I can't really say if like Hart's going to start or not because I like Hart in his role off the bench. I think it's worked out best for him. I think he's thrived in that role. I think he fits in that role really good, and it makes the team much deeper. Just with him being on that bench instantly makes the team deeper. So looking at that, I like that. But I also wouldn't mind if he starts because he already does get closing minutes. So looking at playoffs, he could maybe get a start. I honestly don't know. I think, like I said, down this final stretch, you're kind of going to get a look of that because Hart's minutes are already going up. We saw Hart played like 32 minutes last night. I'm pretty sure he averages like around 27 minutes or something like that. It's still a high number, but he played a lot of minutes last night. I know Brunson wasn't out there, but with the way Hart was playing, he was going to be out there regardless. Hart was everywhere last night. So, just looking at that, I am curious to see how Tom Thibodeau is going to work with that. But honestly, either way you put him, whether it's off the bench or starting, you're going to get a positive impact out of him. It's just a matter of where will he be in the lineup. And I think that's still up in the air. So,
yeah, looking at like a potential playoff lineup, I think, as you mentioned, having him come off the bench makes the most sense. But in a closing lineup, you can go like this closing lineup could be really damn good. You can go Brunson, Quickly, Hart, Randall, Robinson. Not obviously they don't have a superstar player. I get that, right? Or they don't have not that they don't have a superstar. They don't have an MVP, like a player who's going to win the MVP or anything like that. But that's 5 deep. Those are 5 well above average NBA players, and a lot of those guys are really good NBA players. That I think that'll play in a postseason environment. I think that'll be really hard to match up with the defense from Quickly, the defense from Hart, the defense from Robinson, and then I think surrounding Randall and Brunson with guys who play really good defense that's going to be a huge benefit for the Knicks. As you mentioned, no disrespect to Quentin Grimes. It's just a matter of if you're closing out a game, I feel like Quickly's the guy you trust more to get you, high pressure buckets. If you get what I'm saying, he's a little bit hotter from three.
And something I've always said too, Quickly's not afraid of the big stage. I think he proved that in the 2020 playoffs or 2021 when we were the 4th seed. He kind of proved that he had a pretty good playoff stretch. I know overall his stat line was not pretty, but he showed a little bit of flashes of confidence in that playoff series. He showed confidence this season where he can just take over games and do a bunch of things that we haven't really seen out of him that you didn't know he could do, but apparently he can. So I think seeing Quickly will probably get a lot of the bulk of playing time come down that stretch, but I do like his role. I like where you can kind of insert Quickly kind of anywhere. You can insert him, point guard, shooting guard, starting point guard, starting shooting guard. You can kind of insert him anywhere in those guard slots because he plays really well in both those roles. So I'm interested to see how they do it with him. And like you said, no disrespect to Quentin Grimes. It's just experience plays a factor. Experience definitely plays a factor into who's going to get minutes in the playoffs, and that's reasonably so. This is the playoffs. You can't use the playoffs as time to develop players. You got to use this time to send out your best guys and send out the guys you need to win the game. And if Grimes plays really well down the stretch, he could get minutes increase in the playoffs. But at the end of the day, I still think we're going to see a lot more Hart, Quickly, guys like that. I think regardless of how Grimes plays, you're going to see more of that. You're going to see more of Hart and Quickly in the playoff games. But as Grimes continues to develop, and as long as the more he develops with us, come future years when we're a perennial playoff team, he'll probably start get more significant minutes, and I'm excited to see that. But I'm also interested to see how they work around it this season because we got to focus on this season. Can't look too deep into the future right now. So.
Yeah, 100% agree. Right now, the Knicks have to focus on what they can control. They have to focus on, quite frankly, what's in front of them, which is right now what's in front of them is a West Coast of the last the last 3 games of this West Coast trip, and trying to just bounce back and trying to just do what they can to scratch and claw and get themselves into that 5th seed and get themselves and make sure they're healthy and ready for a postseason run that will certainly be plenty of fun for the New York Knicks. But with that being said, thank you guys so much for supporting us. You guys have been great with support lately. We appreciate you guys tuning in. Thank you guys again so much. You guys can follow us on our social medias. We have a TikTok, an Instagram, and a Twitter. You guys also know we have a YouTube. That's how you're watching this most likely. And with that being said, our Twitters are above our heads, and we will see you guys next episode. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Peace out.